Good morning readers, it's Tilly here from Tilly's Shelf and welcome to another bookish breakfast. So we have got a very special guest today, and this guest is my fiance Beau, and he is refusing as usual to appear on camera. Instead he is going to be communicating with you via the medium of post-it notes. So sometime back in August I made this stupid casual offhand comment that was something along the lines of Beau is not really a reader, or he's not like the reader in the couple. And I believe since then he has been scheming to prove me wrong, and he has been planning for me to do his yearly wrap-up for 2019. So behind me I have all of the books that Beau has read one way or another, just so that you can see all of them, throughout the year of 2019, and every single one has got a post-it note review. And Beau's handwriting is not the best. He's missing a small part of his finger, so that kind of affects his writing. So I'm sorry if there's any problems with the post-it note reading, but basically I'm going to read all of his mini reviews to you so that you have an idea of his reading year. To make it more interesting, he has listed his 5 favourite books of the year and his 1 least favourite book of the year, and I have got to guess at the start what they're going to be. Then I'm going to go through all of his post-it note reviews. Then I get to revise my guesses, just if I've changed my mind. And then I'm going to reveal what his actual favourite book and worst books were. So yeah, that's how it's going to work. Just to introduce you to the piles. All of the Harry Potter books we read together. We read them aloud. The 2 piles in the middle were all audiobooks that he read via Audible. He has got quite a long commute, so he uses audiobooks on his commute, which is one way that he's massively increased his reading in the last year or two. And then all of these books here are the books that he read on paper or on Kindle. And he set himself a goal at the start of the year that he would read 100 pages a week. So as you can see, some of these books are pretty chunky. We were talking about setting goals in terms of numbers of books, and he decided that that wouldn't be very fair because he could read like a massively chunky book, and that would still only count for 1 book read. So by setting the goal of 100 pages a week, like a big book suddenly becomes a good thing to choose because you'll probably read it quicker than like 5 short books, but it will count for an equivalent amount. So yes, that was the way that he chose to work that challenge, and I think it worked really well. So you'll see in all of the paper books there are loads of little post-it notes, which was where he marked off every 100 pages that he read, and he did achieve that goal. So he achieved a couple of weeks extras worth of 100 pages, if that makes sense. So he exceeded his original set plan. If that makes sense. So, without further ado, I'm going to tell you the top 5 books that I think Beau read. I had a slight spoiler for this because he left the list open, so I saw the top 2 books that were on it. However, they were the ones I was going to guess anyway. And then after that, I'm just working through, like, working off my own thoughts. And then I've got his least favourite book. It's all about the post-it notes today. So, top book that I believe that Beau has read is Vita Nostra, which is there. I've been talking about that quite a lot lately because I've been reading it, and I know that it's got to be one of his favourite books, or I knew before I saw, because it's the one that he was on and on and on at me to read. Like for months he was saying, have you read it yet? Have you read it yet? You haven't read this yet, you've got to... So I know that he loved it. And I just know from the way he talked about it that he really, really enjoyed it. Then the second one that I was going to say was a book by Thomas Hardy. So he read 2 books by Thomas Hardy. We'll get to them, Tess of the Devils and Jude the Obscure. And again, they were books that he talked about a lot more than some of the other books that he talked about. And I just know that they were quite a different reading experience for him, so I think that they would rate highly. And I did indeed see that Jude the Obscure was on that list. So spoilers for the end of the video. Then the next 3 are complete unknowns, but my immediate instinct was that the Robin Hobb books would be at the top. So this is a series of 3 books. He read the first one while we were on holiday in Norway. It is the one fantasy series, apart from Vita Nostra, that he really wanted me to read. It's the one that he always talks about, and he talks about like the character development. He talks about like the stories and the themes of the stories in a way that he doesn't talk about any of the books. So I think that has got to be one of the top ones. I'll be very surprised if it isn't. And it's a series that he didn't struggle to read. Like, I know some of the other series, he kind of stalled in the middle, but I think he kind of flowed through that pretty well. Then I have put Steelheart by Brandon Sanderson, just because I know that Sanderson has always been one of his favourite authors. I can't really remember his reaction to this one when he read it, but I just have that feeling that because he loves Sanderson so much, probably that one will rank highly. And then I put The Lord of the Rings because that's like a long-term favourite book for both of us. So I think I would be kind of like sad if it didn't turn out to be a favourite, because it always has been a favourite, if that makes sense. Worst book of the year. My initial guess was Order of the Phoenix because we read that together. I enjoyed the reading experience of us reading it together because we had a lot of discussions about it, but it is just a really bad book. But then again, I got a little spoiler and Beau told me that none of the Harry Potter books are included in the best and worst ones because he's counted each series as like a series. So the next guess, and it probably would be top anyway, is The Stone Sky by N.K. Jemisin. This is the last in the Broken Earth series, and I just remember endless rants while he was reading that, and one of the reasons that I've not read it is because he said such bad things about it. I think both of us found that we enjoyed the first book in that series, which was called The Fifth Season. But each subsequent book, like I've not read the last one yet, but they kind of just deteriorated and they didn't live up to the promise of the first book, but they took some of the worst elements of the first book forwards, if that makes sense. And then I do know that he had one DNF, which I'm very disappointed about, which is he did not finish Our Mutual Friend by Charles Dickens, which is bad because that's the book that I begged him to read. So yeah, that's quite bad. So anyway, now it's time to get to the post-it notes. So I'll start with the Harry Potter series because that is going to be the easiest. So that is just the one post-it note for the 7 books. So Harry Potter 1 to 7. All very enjoyable despite the myriad plot holes and inconsistencies. Inventing bogus theories to plug them is probably more than half the fun. That's as in, while we were reading, we were talking about that's a plot hole, but maybe they had to do that because of this and this and this, and like trying to make it make sense. I slightly struggle to give them unique characters because of having watched the film so many times. Yeah, I guess that's like the problem of you see the characters as how they are in the film, even though the films are kind of wrong. Only 1 to 3 were rereads. Thank you. That's to me, I think. And then at the bottom he said, drama! Which was something that he kept interrupting. As I was reading, he would just suddenly turn around and chant, drama! If he thought that it was being a bit melodramatic, which did happen quite frequently. So yeah, that is the Harry Potter books. And on top there's a couple that we don't have the physical copies for, and that is Michael Sullivan, Legends of the First Empire, audiobooks 1 to 4. Huge improvements with his extra experience, better story, structure, concepts, characters, and execution. Unusual in that it seems to be getting more creative as it goes, rather than getting bogged down in a traditional war like so many others do. Excited for Age of Death, which I assume is the next in the series. I think I actually read these the wrong way around. So this is Michael Sullivan again, and this is the Riyria Revelations, audiobooks 1 to 6. Enjoyable, but really felt like they were first books, which they are, early books for that author. Plays a bit too much into tropes and stereotypes, but it's a fun adventure. Fell short of the enormity it attempted, but the details in the world and mythology are nice. Lovely. So, moving to stack number 1. Oh my goodness, this is bad. And the first stack we have is Mortal Engines by Philip Reeve. And I also read Mortal Engines. Is that what the series is called? I can't remember. Sorry about this. Infernal... Oh. well, I don't know what the series is called, but the first book in it is Mortal Engines. So Mortal Engines times 4 on audiobook. Kind of basic in places and riddled with pedant issues, but overall enjoyable if you just take it for what it is. Yeah, I'd say that's probably fair. It's definitely not a great book, but it is quite fun. Then we've got Tess of the D'Urbervilles on audiobook. Tess, my first Hardy, and it didn't disappoint. Much more accessible to me than other classics I'd sampled. Made me feel even worse about being male, but I felt it a drastically superior handling of bad men than actually ever. Very satisfying ending. All too often authors shy away from things like that and it diminishes the power of the book. I would have to say that I agree. Then Jude the Obscure. I haven't read this one, so hopefully there's no spoilers in this mini review. A stunner. Got halfway in thinking, sure, a bit grisly, but not quite what the reputation had me expecting. Holy wow, did shit hit the fan. +1 vote for Hardy as grandfather of Grimdark. It's made me even more excited to read this eventually. Way of Kings. Oh, I forgot that he read Way of Kings. Maybe Way of Kings should be the Brandon Sanderson that I rate as one of his favourites. We'll see what the review says. Brandon Sanderson, Stormlight Archives, Words of Radiance, Stormlight Archives, Oathbringer. Oh, I see. So those are the next 2 books in this series. So he read Way of Kings and Words of Radiance and Oathbringer, but we only have the physical copy of Way of Kings, which frankly is quite big enough. Genuinely excellent, very, very Sanderson, but really stunning. One of the few full-blown epics, gigas, that doesn't suffer from feeling like it's trying too hard. Not a fan of his retrospectively shoehorning stuff into his Cosmere, but great stories. Great is like in capital letters and underlined and bigger than all of the other words. So yeah. If SA continues as it's going, it'll be up there with Lord of the Rings, Wheel of Time, etc. SA must be Stormlight Archives. So I think I was right in saying that one of his favourite books would be a Brandon Sanderson, but it's definitely this one. And the way that he says it will be up there with Lord of the Rings makes me think that Lord of the Rings is up there. So I think I'm doing pretty well so far. There we go. And then next couple. So, still on audiobooks, The Handmaid's Tale. This was another one that I also read, and I would say it's probably one of the best books that I read this year. But I think that Beau enjoyed it, but I don't think he agrees to that extent, but let's see. So Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. Pleasantly surprised, not at all what I'd expected. Found some of it a little overdone, but I think that was the narrator rather than the book. I liked the audiobook narrator. I think Beau didn't like her so much. I feel it gets a bit more hype than it ought, but that certainly doesn't mean it's not worthy of significant note. Lovely. That's good, because that was another book that I strongly recommended, so I'm glad that that one at least went down relatively well. Then this is Stephen Erikson, Malazan, books 1, 2, and 3. I know that he had some issues with these books, and I know that he doesn't believe anyone who says that they liked them, so I don't think this is the worst series, but I do think that it's quite low down there. Extremely tough going, plenty of legitimately cool and inventive content, but the constant raging battles are second only to the battle of getting through it. Grimdark is one thing, but this ventures into grotesque. Zero characterization, so the merciless horror, wow, just felt hollow and superfluous. Horrible attitude towards women will not be finishing. Ooh, cutting. So yeah, there's 2 from that series. Yeah, so maybe a candidate for worst book of the year actually, but I still think it's The Stone Sky. And then we've got Alistair Reynolds, Revelation Space. I think this looks like a bit more like a sci-fi. Revelation Space, a good book but a bad audiobook. Very creative and interesting sci-fi, but no Ian M. Banks. That was another person that I considered putting in the top 5 list. Too much time spent plotting and scheming by some characters, but the adventure and concepts were fun. So Vita Nostra, sure this is the favourite. Vita Nostra audiobook, a real breath of fresh air, excellent execution of what it is, but what it is certainly won't appeal to, he's put anyone, but I think he means everyone. Would recommend to just about anyone. Only prerequisite is at least one fantasy YA series for context on why this is so out there. Not without its issues, but very, very strong. Yeah, I think what he's referring to is like, this is young adult fantasy, but it's not young adult fantasy. It's so different from every other fantasy series that, like, ever. It's really, really, really unique in terms of that context. So yeah, I would join him in recommending it to anyone who is kind of like, maybe people who are looking to branch out a little bit. Like, if you read a lot of YA fantasy, then I would say read this just to be just that little step beyond your genre. And I think this one was one that he was looking for fantasy books that weren't all about battles, and found a recommendation for this one, and it isn't about battles. So yeah. Then Norwegian Wood. This was another one that I recommended. I read this, I think, when I was about, I was going to say 16, but I definitely read it while I was in Jordan, so I must have been 18 or 19. But I don't really remember much of what went into it, but I enjoyed it, and I thought it would be a good one in terms of encouraging him to branch out away from fantasy slightly. So yeah. Norwegian Wood by Haruki Murakami. Interesting change of pace. Enjoyed it, but wouldn't rush out to buy more. Don't really have much to say, really. Much stronger feelings for a secondary character, Raiko, than any of the primaries, but not sure what that says about me or the book. Could be a bit over-crude in places. Yeah. Then we've got Tad Williams, The Dragonbone Chair. And I think this is it says book 1 of the epic masterpiece, like not blowing its own trumpet at all. Memory, Sorrow and Thorn. He read 1 to 4 on audio. Way, full stop, 2, full stop, long, full stop. Good content, but should have been done in half the words. Feels quite trope-tastic by today's reckoning, but it was written in the 80s. Particularly enjoyed Megwin's arc. So that's all of the Tad Williams. Ian Banks, The Bridge. So yeah, this is the only Ian Banks this year, and I think that I know he likes Ian Banks normally. Ian Banks, The Bridge, totally bonkers. Didn't enjoy it most of the way through, but once it all got tied up, I suddenly did. Interesting. Not an easy read, as usual for him, and refreshingly frank. He sure isn't afraid of getting real. Yeah, an interesting review, so possibly not one of his favourites then. I have a feeling this is not one of the... Yeah, it's Ian Banks, so that means it's not sci-fi, right? And then The Lord of the Rings would be the last of the audiobooks. First reread since primary school after watching the films about 1 million times. Obviously great, but the books don't really get me a solid connection with the characters. I fear this may be the film's doing. Objectively, despite its goodness, I enjoy other books more. A lot of changes in 70 years, and I'm not in it for the literary brilliance. That is interesting. So maybe Lord of the Rings is not one of the favourites. We'll see. Then these are the ones that he actually read on paper. The Healer's Road. Oh, I think this was on Kindle. The Healer's Road, S.E. Robertson. Just really nice. Set in a fantasy world with magic, but that is purely coincidental to the story, which is largely a will they, won't they romance. Which is done way better than most fantasy. The magic is just there and unimportant, which is novel. I think, again, with Vita Nostra, this was part of the goal to find things that were set in magical worlds that weren't, like, obsessed with the massive clash of good and evil, which can be sometimes really overdone. So it's interesting to find that some of those, like, got quite good reviews. The Animals of Farthing Wood by Colin Dan. Best left to nostalgia. Yeah, I think this was a reread of a book that was a favourite book as a child, and that's really sad when you read a book that you loved and turns out to not be very good. This one, Michael Morpurgo, Little Foxes. So Beau loves foxes. They're like his thing, really. So I think he pretty much bought this because it was a book about foxes, and it's got cute baby foxes on the front of it. Little Fox is cute, but even more basic than I expected. Saying that, it does have a nice non-fairy tale ending, overall nice. Yeah, I don't think he realised quite how much of a children's book it was. I think we've both read books by Michael Morpurgo that he's aimed at a slightly older readership, whereas this is definitely at the very young reader end of the spectrum. It does have, like, nice illustrations. Six of Crows. So this was a booktube darling, and I don't think that he got along with it as much as many of the YA booktubers do. Fun for a quick blast, but left wanting in almost every way. I've not read Grisha, so maybe that's why, but I suspect not. A fun heist story with some genuine flair, but for the most part felt like an author jumping on the fantasy bandwagon. Too American, but I don't know how to explain that. This was something that came up again and again with American fantasy books over the course of the year, and that it was about like the kind of like wisecracking jokes type characters and stuff, that they all had a very similar American YA feel, but it's quite hard to quantify like why that is and what you could change about it to make it better, but something in the writing style. Crooked Kingdom is their next book to Six of Crows. I enjoyed this book just marginally more than The Name of the Wind, meaning less than a dictionary. They can at least show you something new. Oh, the dictionary can at least show you something new. Sorry, America. Yeah. The Name of the Wind is a book that one of my colleagues was trying really hard to get me to read, and oh, whoopsie, knocked over the file. Then I went back and I said to Beau, oh, my colleague really wants me to read this fantasy book, The Name of the Wind, and he was just like, just don't bother, it's bad. So yeah, maybe divides opinions slightly. Then Steelheart, Brandon Sanderson, like I said, this was the one that I guessed in his top books before I realised that the Way of Kings, the Stormlight archive books were in the pile. So I think good but not very good. Certainly not his finest work, but it has its merits and is relatively fun. Everything was quite two-dimensional and predictable, but it is what it is. Okay, so like a mixed review. Philip Pullman, Book of Dust. I really thought I'd have read this by now, but things had just kept getting in the way. So this is the second of the Books of Dust, and this is the Secret Commonwealth book. The Secret Commonwealth, very good and enjoyable. Two main issues. One is a spoiler. The other is that whilst it is a solid book, I'm not sure that might be a spoiler too. Right. Hurry up and read me. That's to me. Good book, would recommend, just couldn't possibly stack up to his Dark Materials, nothing could. I think that's because, for both of us, his Dark Materials is like a standout, absolutely one of the best books written in the last, like, 50 years. For me, I think for Beau it would be one of the best books written ever, but for me it's definitely, like, top for recent years. So, The Stone Sky, or Jemison 2 and 3, so we both read the 5th season last year, and these two this year, except I haven't read, yeah, you get it. Extra cool ideas, good characters, great magic, really loved the plot, went off in a totally different direction to what I expected, very strong content, and I only have one suggestion: someone else write it. The writing nearly had me rage quit so many times. She also seems to have a strong distaste for men. Yeah, I think I would agree. I think the main issue that I had with the first two, so 5th season and Obelisk Gate, like, I liked the writing style in the first one, but it just became more and more over the top and more like difficult to actually enjoy. And then in terms of like the gender politics, I suppose, it was made too much of a big deal of, and there's no, I mean, obviously there's loads of male fantasy writers who don't write women well, but it works the other way around too. There's female fantasy writers who don't write men well, and there are just no redeemable male characters in the series, it seems like. But anyway, rant aside, I think I'm going to stick with that as the least favourite book of the year. Then this is Trudy Canavan, Angel of Storms. And this is 2 and 3 of the Millennium's Rule series is what he read this year. So much cool stuff in this series, gets a bit bogged down in scheming and ethics, but so much creativity in one place. Mostly very good characters, but the magic and concepts steal the show, although unfortunately book 1 was easily the best. Eagerly awaiting Maker's Curse, which I think is the last book in the series. And then the Robin Hood books, which I'm sure these are going to be in the favourites. Excuse me. And this is books 7 to 9 of the series. Fitz and the Fool, I think this mini series is, but I think it's a trilogy of trilogies, if that makes sense. Deeply satisfying ending to the Fitz nonology, 9 books maybe. Not done the side quests yet, I think these are extra books. More complex, more complete, more brilliant. Still prone to being a touch overcooked on telling the reader how intense things are, but it can be dealt with. Huge reading commitment, but do it. And then I presume this is a character, that he's just written B and a little heart. I think that is a character actually. Yeah, so I would definitely still say that those are in the top books. Right, so that is all of the books read, and I can't see any more post-it notes here around. So it's time for the big reveal, guys. Did I manage to guess the top 5 books correctly and the worst book? Okay, best books of the year in increasing enjoyment. Oh, right, so I thought Vita Nostra, I saw Vita Nostra at the top of the list and I thought that meant that it was top of the list, but it's actually working in the opposite direction. So Vita Nostra was number 5, then Angel of Storms, which is Trudy Canavan. Yeah, I think I almost put that in my list, but then I know that one of the books he really dragged for him, so I wasn't sure which one it was. Jude the Obscure, I'm so happy that that made it onto the list, because it was me who said you should read some Hardy, and it's like I won, one of my recommendations won. And then Stormlight 3, Oathbringer, which again we've discussed, Sanderson, and then Robin Hobb, number 7, Fool's Assassin, which, yeah, I was sure Robin Hobb would be on there. And then he's commented, interesting because first in final trilogy, not the very end. Fitz and B forever. I'm gonna have to read it to work out what that's all about. So yeah, so Robin Hobb, must be how he's written it. Robin Hobb number 7 was the best book of the year, and I'm not surprised because it is a book that he's talked about. Even when he hadn't read it for months, he was still sometimes saying, oh, in the Robin Hobb books. So that, I think that's a pretty clear indicator of a favourite book. And then worst book of the year, I'm completely surprised actually. Malazan 3 as a DNF, which I thought Our Mutual Friend was going to be the DNF that would be on the worst book of the year. But I didn't even realise that he hadn't finished Malazan 3. I thought he meant that he wasn't finishing the series, not that he hadn't finished the book. So yeah, so that surprised me. And also Crooked Kingdom. So the Stone Sky doesn't even get a look in. Yeah, so I know that he didn't like the Crooked Kingdom, but I didn't think that it was the worst book of the year. So I am surprised and wrong. So I hope he forgives me for not knowing his worst book. But I think overall I didn't do too badly. So that was all of Beau's 2019 books, and he did count up how many there were, but I've forgotten how many. But I think it was something around 50. I don't know how many do you think we've mentioned. I'll try and put a count in the description. I asked him if he had any reading goals for 2020 that he wanted me to mention, and he said, and I quote, nah. So yeah, I think he's just going to continue with the audiobooks and continue with also reading on paper. He said he's not going to try and do the 100 pages per week thing again, even though it worked really well. Together, I think we're going to read The Hunger Games, but we're going to have a little break after the Harry Potters because that was a little bit of a slog as we got towards the end. And then my reading goal for Beau, if I'm allowed to set one, is I'm going to keep recommending books that are maybe slightly outside of the specific fantasy sci-fi world that I think he will enjoy. And one of the things that I thought would work really well with Hardy was that it is really like melodramatic and pessimistic storylines, and I knew that he would love that, and I knew that he would love things like the very sad ending to Tess. So I'm going to keep recommending classic books that I think will suit his other reading tastes. That didn't work with our mutual friend. I thought he would like the kind of multiple storylines thing, because a lot of fantasy books have that, but it's just helping me to hone my knowledge of the books that I should be recommending. And I think he's going to read at least a couple more Thomas Hardy's over the course of the year. Thank you very much for watching. I hope that's been an interesting divergence into, broadly speaking, long fantasy series. And yeah, that's just a little bit of a taster of what Beau reads. Thank you for watching, and comment if you've read any of these, or if you've got any recommendations that based on these you think that Beau will like to read this year, and I will speak to you soon. Bye!